Welcome to the Amphibian Press podcast. I'm V.S. Holmes, and with me today is Brittani Avery, author of Element Unknown. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. This is a really cool experience so far.
I always love doing podcasts because I feel like we can really get into the nitty-gritty of what makes us writers. So tell me a little bit about Element Unknown for those of us who haven't gotten a chance to read it yet.
So Element Unknown is mainly a story about Rex, who is a young man in the higher class that's trying to find his place in society. His dad is really well known in the city. He's actually a councilman of the whole country, and so he had pretty big boots to fill. So as a way to kind of prove his ability to be an adult and make his own decisions, he decides to purchase a slave to free her, but kind of goes about it in a roundabout way. And eventually his dad has to bail him out, but now he has this slave named Mina who's never been free, so doesn't really know how to be a person. So they're both trying to learn how to be what society needs them to be at the same time as they develop friendships and things like that.
I love that counterbalancing too, because there's this, very privileged character, and then this character who's very underprivileged, and sort of watching them go through the same struggle is a really neat way to write a novel.
Yeah, thanks. It didn't really start out as I'm going to write a book. It just kind of happened as an accident. So the two main characters actually came from role-playing sites that I used to do a long time ago, but they never really took off the ground. Either the site closed down or I got too busy with homework and whatnot, or job. And so I just kind of did a what if, and what if these two people met? And then one word document after another. I started explaining it to my sister, and she's like, that sounds like a book. I'm like, oh, I guess it is. So just kind of finished up writing and then just started to figure out how to publish it on my own.
I love that you brought up the whole what if thing, because that's how I write. And, I think a lot of people, obviously, everyone writes differently, all that. But I think a lot of people start out writing with that sort of brain exercise of well, what if this, what if that, sort of as we're daydreaming and doing all the other things that we have to do to exist as a person, like work and school and whatnot. And your brain just won't stop, right? Because as soon as you answer one question, there's another one. It's okay, well, what if this then? I just love that. And I think I still do that, even now when I'm 8 books in. It's that's where the very first ideas start, even before I outline or I even know the character's name, right?
Right. Because it's basically writing a book is kind of answering just a bunch of questions well, what if this happens? Well, this person meets this other person, or what if they go to this place and they interact with people that are completely different from them, how they react to those new people. It's just a lot of what if questions that are slowly answered throughout the process of the book.
Right. Exactly. Tell me a little bit about the world that you've created, because you have elemental magic, which is something that I love. I think all sorts of magic systems are really fascinating, but elemental magic I find particularly interesting. And you have the 4 elements, but you also have these other 2, light and dark. So tell me a little bit about that aspect of the world.
Yeah, so the world of Element Unknown is not necessarily a magic. It's more of a science.
Okay.
And it is studied, and people try to figure out what element they belong to, and they may or may not have the power to associate with the element. So someone might have a super fiery personality, they're super passionate, they're outspoken, good leaders, and that might just be it. But they also might be able to throw fire projectiles or become almost like a human torch in a sense. So, and the same with water, it's usually you're really peacekeeper, easy going with the flow, but they also, if they have the ability, can control water, can make it freeze, turn it to ice. Some even the more advanced technique, they can freeze the raise or lower someone's temperature, or even manipulate the blood as well.
Oh, neat. Okay.
So it's more of a science in each element. Earth are pretty studious, usually very framing oriented, and they can control earth, create mountains and things. And one thing about certain earth elemental is that they can read the current thoughts or even the memories of people, depending on if they have that ability or not.
Oh, neat.
And then for air, they're really like bubbly, outgoing, like to be performers and things like that. And they can control air, they might be able to fly. And so those are the main four. And then the two that you mentioned, light and dark, are really rare usually.
Okay.
They're usually not like someone's not going to be a solely light element. You can have actually mixture. So you can have someone be a fire light elemental, or maybe like a water dark elemental.
Okay.
And they can have powers of both of them, as well as personality aspects of both too. So lights are usually very, um, you know, very kind, giving. They can get a little like self-righteous, thinking that people are a little beneath them.
Mhm.
And whereas dark, they're usually a lot more, they're clever. They usually manipulate people to get their way. And they might be very possessive of the things that they have or people that they like love.
Mhm.
So, and the powers are associated with that as well. So like dark can make like dark energy balls. They can like jump in and out of shadows, manipulate shadows,
Oh, cool.
and light can do basically the reverse of that. So
Nice.
that's kind of where the elemental system comes in.
Mhm.
And it's a pretty extensive part of elemental unknown, just because it's not just only powers, it's based on your personality. So if you know your element, you'll know how you react, but then also know how to deal with other people as well.
Mhm. Well, I think it's really interesting that you've sort of brought in both the elements, the actual power magic, but also the personality aspect, which is almost a little reminiscent of like the zodiacs, right? Where it's like, oh, well,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a fire sign, or I'm a water sign, and all these different ways that we categorize people and ourselves, which can be a very bad thing in certain circumstances, but can also be very comforting, with finding your own community. And then you have these
Mm-hmm.
two characters who aren't really categorized, neither know exactly where they come from. They have sort of some mystery, as far as their origins. And I just think that juxtaposition is really cool.
Thanks. That's basically the main part of the book, is trying to figure out what they are, where they come from. Because Rex knows his dad, and he remembers his mom, but she
Mhm.
disappeared when he was like 5.
Right.
So he has glimpses of her, and like people always talk about her, but he doesn't really know who she is. And as like things progress in the book, he starts to not know what she is even.
Hmm.
So, and Mina is like blue with white hair, purple streaks. Her left eye, I guess, red, and her right eye is green. So she looks completely different from most other people,
Hmm.
even with like the more like fairy tale aspect where they have like fairies and elves and things like that. Most people don't look anything like her.
Hmm.
So she's just like, what am I? Who am I? And trying to develop her own personality, just because she's been a slave for her entire life. She's just developed personalities to appease whichever master she had at the time. But now she
Right.
had the chance to actually be herself, whoever that happens to be.
Hmm. Now, Rex's race, they're humans, or are they something else?
He's half human and half something
Okay,
else.
I gotcha. um, Something that I noticed on your website, which I find super cool, is you're also a computer programmer,
Mhm.
which I know a lot of people think is like a super analytical thing, but I've sort of come to
Yeah.
understand it as like very creative in its own way. So, what parts of writing programs and dealing with coding as a language, how has that changed the way you write stories, or has it at all?
I think it has. And that's kind of cool that you mentioned that programming can be creative, because I told some people that I wrote a book and they kind of like give me like a what? Really? Like you're creative? Like, yeah, like I am creative, even though I am a huge nerd, and like I like my, analytical spaces, but then I also have creative side.
Mhm.
So I think that my analytical side helps me organize things.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And when I can't organize things, or I like not sure, or I have things in all sorts of different places, it's hard for me to really figure out the whole like layout of whatever I'm writing,
Mhm.
whether it's just a poem or short story, even a novel, being able to have all the random research I have to do, or like character bios, like in the one place I can find them, really helps me to be able, like, okay, how did I spell that person's name again? What color is their eyes? And having it all in like one place helps me keep it consistent. Just because, like in programming, like if you have a variable and like if you misspell it, your whole thing will blow up.
Right.
As with writing, it's very similar. Like if you've changed someone's hair in one scene versus the other, your reader's gonna be like, "What?
Right.
Did she magically change her hair or typo?" Or my programming helps me be organized, and then I just kind of, for actually writing and being creative, I have a sketched out layout most of the time, but usually I just kind of just go with the flow.
Mhm. Well, I think it's sort of interesting because when you, I mean, I do very rudimentary like coding, very like nothing,
Mhm.
and it's something that I'm sort of trying to learn a little bit more about as far as coding ebooks,
Cool.
which I just learned is like a thing that I can do, and I'm really excited about it. But obviously, like super amateur here. But I think it's interesting when you're sort of looking at something, whether it's a program or a book, from the creator's standpoint, like sort of from the back end almost,
Mhm.
and how hard it is to untangle stuff from that end when it's so clear when you're looking at it from like a consumer's perspective or a user's perspective. And, either it works or it doesn't work, but when you're the
Mhm.
creative aspect, it's not, it either works or it doesn't work because you're trying to solve those problems. And it is just sort of a series of what if questions again, like, does this work? No. Does this work? Yes.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. Because like I do both front end and back end development, and it's two completely different worlds. So from the front end, it's very pretty. You just click a button, and then boom, you get your results. Where the back end, like you're making all sorts of different calls, getting all this information, trying to organize it and shove it to the front end, and then the front end like, okay, thank you, and then just like displays it. So.
And you're just sitting back
Uh,
there like sweating profusely, like, oh my god.
A bit, yeah. So like if anything in the backend kind of messes up in the front end, like, oh, what do I do? So it just throws an error. Then the user is like, oh no, it's broken. And like they can't go in the back end. They don't know, most of them don't even really know all of what goes into just submitting a form.
Mhm.
So and it's kind of, I think, the similar way too with like when you write, like people ask, well, how do you write a book? Like, well, first you gotta have a halfway of an idea, and then you start maybe asking questions. Then you pull some random guy over there who just like keeps yelling at you to put him in the story, and then you just kind of outline it and sort of get it together, and then you try to make it look pretty and hope that it makes sense, and then give it to people. So where like a book, people just like, oh, here's the book, and they just start reading it. So it is very similar to like front end versus back end versus when you write a book versus just reading one.
Well, and also once you have endeavored to create something, whether you were successful or not, I think then when you go to be a consumer, you can see the inner workings in a different way,
Yep.
which is sometimes not great. I feel like sometimes I just want to read a book and get lost again.
Yep. Like that's one thing I've kind of noticed as I'm reading a book where I was like, wait, how, what? Where'd that person come from? Or I'll have to reread something and like, that doesn't make any sense. I would have reworded it a little differently. I try not to, but just the same with like if I go to a website too, it's just like that's why would you know why this color palette don't. So it's it's kind of hard to like separate, like turn off the working part, but it's always there.
Yeah, I also feel like, and I mean, obviously everyone's writing style is different, and I'm sure everyone's like programming style varies. But I feel like I need to be able to see what it's doing, both with writing and then when I'm, if I'm working on, for example, site design, you know, obviously I've had to build my own website and all sorts of stuff. And I need to know what it is that I'm doing and how it's going to work. Maybe not like the details exactly, but I need to know the mechanics of it a bit more. And certain site designers who like, I can't, I can't use them because for me, it's not intuitive. And I feel like that's the same with writing. It's like I need to know what this is going to do for the story, like, and maybe I can put it aside until I figure it out, but I need to know
Mhm.
eventually.
Yeah, no, that's definitely like I actually in my job we just had a basically redesigning our whole project or like whole product that we like kind of like give to customers. They
Mhm.
create well, we create assessments and then they take them to help them make their team more efficient and just be able, they're more efficient, they work better, they make more money, so they pay us to be better. And so we're redesigning everything, and the designers keep changing the design because the developers keep asking, well, what is this supposed to do? Why do we have this drop down? What is it actually going to do? And so, like with certain scenes too, as you're writing a scene, like, why is this? I'm like, I'm writing a scene, but like, why is it here? What are they going to do? Are they going to add anything? Right now, no. So then you just chuck it until you find a place for it, or you might not, depending on where the story goes.
Mhm. Well, do you are you an outliner or are you more of a pantser when it comes to writing?
I'm a weird mixture. Like I have a basic idea, like main points of what I want to hit. But then actually just recently I was writing something and then this random scene came in. I'm like, this has to be in. It had no other like plan for it at all. I'm like, nope, this needs to be in because I was actually writing something else, threw that out and put this new scene in.
I always find it interesting, right? Like what types of people are pantsers versus plotters. And I mean, I'm definitely more of a plotter. I'm definitely more of an outliner. But like we were talking about, the initial inspiration and the initial like answering of those questions is incredibly organic and not at all outlined. Um, and I have a friend who she's teaching a course in story blueprinting, which I just started with my newest novel, and it's highly organized, but it's also highly creative. Um, and it's the first time that I'm really seeing these two things come together in like a functional way.
Yeah.
Because I think in a lot of cases we sort of think of them as opposites, right?
Yeah, it's always like I know on Twitter they usually have polls like, are you a plotter or a pantser? And it's like, well,
Most of us are
bit of
both, right?
both. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but it's really cool that your friend was able to make something that works for both kind of ways of writing.
Yeah, I mean, she's testing it. It worked for her. It worked for her, and she
Okay.
writes her actual like writing process is very different from mine. So I'm really interested to see how it works for me because like watching her do it, I'm like, actually, I think that could really work. But it's really interesting to me that two completely different writing processes might be able to sort of use the same methods. So
Yeah, that's awesome.
yeah. So obviously you said that you write a lot of different things. You were talking about poetry and things like that as well. Are you planning on having Element Unknown be a series?
Yes. um, so I have the sequel in progress right now. I'm mostly finished. I got a lot written down, and I'm very close to the end of the book. There's maybe a few more things I should like double check because I've went back to the beginning, changed things or added stuff, and character did different stuff. So I had to go back and kind of reorganize and make sure things are concise and
Right.
consistent. But very close to at least getting the first draft done of the sequel
Hmm.
and hoping, but we'll see, maybe release later this year. And as for a third one, I don't know. Like, I have an idea, and there's still like some unanswered questions. Like, a lot will be answered, so a lot of people will be satisfied with just the first two, but there's still some kind of lingering ones, and like a story that I'm sort of have in my head for a third book.
Hmm.
But I think after that, it might be done. And I actually have like a more like I guess you would call it contemporary fiction. I'm not sure, but it's
Hmm.
a more modern and less fantasy oriented idea that I have, where it's basically kind of like another what if question of
Right.
like, what if like me in high school had met one of my good friends in high school,
Hmm.
and we're very opposite. At least when in high school, we were definitely more opposite. I was more like the little like emo kid in high school, and my friend was super bubbly and like an extrovert and like hang out with people but still a nerd, and I'm just like sitting in the corner moping. And so I kind of wanted to do like a what if and like change, honestly change things, but like just to see what would have happened had we met in high school and then kind of go from there.
Hmm. I love that because, like, I mean, I think that's something that we're all starting to see a little bit more, especially as like, you know, social media becomes more of a thing. It's like we're connected with people who we wouldn't necessarily have connected with when we were younger. And I think that might be sort of part of the struggle of a lot of older generations, you know, they never had that sort of forced exposure um, that the internet kind of brings. And I think it's so funny that you described you and your friend that way, because I had a friend in it was my senior year of high school and it was her junior year, and I was like you, right? And she was very much like your friend, you know. She was this, you know, blonde, bubbly, giggly optimist, like always wore pastels and florals. And
Hmm.
we actually had to work together at the hospital. And so she walks in for her first shift, and there's this kid like wearing these like ripped jeans, Converse sneakers, this like black skull something or another shirt, like shaved head, tons of ear piercing, and she's like, what is this? And we ended up being incredibly good friends, you know, where we sort of drifted apart as life happened. But I think that's really fun to examine, because, and I mean, and I guess you're also sort of examining it a little bit with Element Unknown, these two very different background people sort of thrown together.
Yeah. And I think most of what I write when is honestly, even poetry wise, obviously way more abstract and
Mhm.
rhymey sometimes, but it's all about like relationships and interactions with people. Because
Mhm.
like, yeah, there's like a big overarching plot and there's a goal in the end, but I guess for me, as a writer and even as a reader too, I enjoy seeing the interactions between characters and seeing how they develop throughout the book, whether they stay friends or if they've started out as like enemies, or if they change to be more understanding of each other,
Mhm.
or if they were friends and then something happened and then they become like distant from each other. Do they get back like together as friends, or like to see people's relationship change and move as events happen around them?
Mhm.
And so I think that's usually what my writing surrounds, is relationship between character and the people, just because people are really unique and really different and can react in all sorts of different ways depending on what happens.
Yeah. People are weird, right?
Yeah.
People are weird. Even the most normal. Maybe especially the most normal appearing people.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
um and also, so I noticed that you're really into personality types, which I mean, and it's definitely reflected in Element Unknown with the different personalities. um so did you sit down and did you sort of come up with like, okay, well, a lot of the fire element characters have these few personality types? Is that something that you like sat down and did, or do you just sort of have it in your head?
Uh, a bit of both. I think at first I started with just in my head and just kind of worked on like personality traits of like each of the element, and then eventually I wrote them down.
Mhm.
Because I had started writing the random Word documents and story thing. It was not quite, I don't know, I guess just story, because it wasn't really quite a book yet. But then I was like, well, I need to write this down somewhere. And eventually, as I determined that I was going to actually finish it and make it into a book, I wanted to make sure that the elements weren't contradictory to each other, or that
Mhm.
they like made sense.
Right.
Because I think at one time that like the Earths were like, they were more loners, but they still were family oriented. And I was like, that, I guess that could kind of work, but then I eventually changed it to be more of that they feel obligated to be around their family, and it's more of an obligation of like holding things together, keeping things consistent with their family, keeping things together, because they don't really like change.
Mhm.
So any change that may happen within their family dynamic, they kind of resist it. And so they feel obligated to keep the family together, to make peace in a sense, not for peace sake, but more just so that things don't have to change.
Mhm. Well, and that adds so much more nuance too, you know, and I think exploring that is really important as a writer, because, you know, people aren't cut and dried. And as much as we want to categorize ourselves and each other, you know, it's not simple ever.
No, yeah. And I think that's what I wanted to make when had the like categories, just because with even like personality types or like zodiac signs or whatever, people can fit into usually just one very well. They might bleed into another one, but they usually don't have like 4 different types.
Right.
So I wanted them to be like unique enough as to where people can identify with maybe like 1 or 2, or even just one solely, but then still make them similar enough as to where multiple people will actually pick 1 or 2, and they are just so like off the rails. We're like, I don't know anyone who sounds like that kind of thing.
Yeah. I remember when I was like very young, like we're talking maybe 7, before like we're actually fully formed human beings, I think, as far as our brains and personality go. My mom, who's, an incredible extrovert, has tons of friends and is always like in the middle of something. She couldn't figure out like why she couldn't relate to me in a way that I think she expected to. I'm an only child, so it's sort of like just us, and she was wondering where this disconnect was happening. And finally, she sent me off to get my personality done, and she had hers done at the same time, through the Myers-Briggs system.
Mm-hmm.
And like finally, I guess the results came back, and she's like, "Oh, that's why we are like totally different in a lot of ways. It's because she's always in the middle of something, and I'm off on my own. I'm totally content to be in my own head, or having close, in-depth conversations, but not like surrounded by humans."
Yeah, that's funny. I think actually that kind of because I got really big into Myers-Briggs too a few years ago.
Mhm.
And I was just like trying to type to everybody. I'm like, oh, you're this and you're that and you're this and you're that. And I eventually typed my whole family. And it's just really interesting how my family dynamic is, because you have my mom, who is I forget exactly what it is, but she's more of like an introverted, like sensor person.
Mhm.
And my dad's an extroverted sensor person with the feeling thing. And they don't necessarily butt heads, but they come to the same point, just from very different ways of going about it.
Mhm.
Then me and my sister are pretty opposite, where I'm very like introverted and perceptive and like just see more into myself, and my sister's like out there experiencing stuff. Like she's actually a pediatric nurse, so she's constantly around people, constantly dealing with people. And I'm a developer and I work remotely, so I have very limited human interaction, and I'm okay with that. So it's just really crazy how like just even from the same 2 parents, like the distinct just personality that can come just
Mhm.
from like the nature nurture combination thing, and just create really different people at the end.
Yeah. Well, that's part of why I think it's so funny that my mom had to go like have me tested for this, is because I'm like almost exactly, I think, like what my dad was. There's some differences here and there, but like much more similar with him. And it's like you could have just looked at the guy you married, mom. And I took after him in like so many other ways too. So it's like I don't know why she didn't think of that, but maybe she was just like expecting it only in the like solitary brooding man.
Yeah, because that's one thing I know, that like my type, I think INTP, is very rarely in women. So like
Oh, interesting.
when I tell people I'm an INTP, they're like, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense. But like most of the time they've only seen like guys in it. But like if you compare me with most of the people I work with,
Hmm.
like a lot of my like coworkers, a lot of them are very like into themselves, very reflective, and so I act similar to them. So it would make sense why I would be drawn to this field. But
Hmm.
a lot of people just like, I guess because it's not like dead in their face, they're just like, until I say something, they're like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. I wonder too, like how our person, because obviously, like you said, nurture versus nature. I wonder how our personalities are changed by how we're socialized. Because like
Yeah.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
girls tend to be socialized differently than boys, especially in
Oh yeah.
certain cultures. So I wonder, is it just because we're socializing girls in a certain way that fewer have that personality type?
Could be, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Cause like even with me, I was a very like I was socializing, given Barbie and stuff, whatever, but I always gravitated more towards like race car tracks and like computer stuff. But I had a really close relationship with my dad who was into that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So, and my mom also isn't very like the traditional feminine woman either. Like she's basically, we nicknamed her like Home Depot because she literally had like every, like if you need any kind of tool, I think we got a wet saw in my parents'
Oh,
garage and like a whole bunch of like handy stuff. Like they've redone their whole house pretty much by themselves with the help of maybe like my uncle.
wow. Mhm.
That's it. So they've done a lot on their own. So I guess because I wasn't necessarily like this, stereotypical traditional like female, so to speak,
Mhm.
I guess that maybe did help maybe shape my personality to be more male oriented.
Mhm.
And maybe why I gravitated more towards computers and things like that. And also like too, my parents are in computers. My dad built computers for fun by hand,
Mhm.
and then my mom is a business analyst, where she's basically the go between the techie people and this business people who just can't talk to each other.
Oh, I do not envy her that job.
Oh goodness, no. Mm-mm.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting too, like when you're talking about gravitating towards different jobs, because I'm an INFJ, I guess, which I don't know very
Mm-hmm,
much about it, but I guess that's more of like a leadership loner thing. Um,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and I definitely like I have a leadership position as a crew chief in archaeology, but I'm like working in these very remote places, so I still don't ever have to talk to people beyond like my little group. And it's, I think it's really interesting how different people will gravitate towards different careers and like you said, taking different paths to get to the same goal. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important to sort of be able to have conversations about the different paths we take to a similar goal, especially like in the way the world is right now, on fire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And not just from personalities, but like I think learning how to do that just on an interpersonal basis might help us figure it out on a bigger scale.
Yeah, no, that's definitely kind of like a theme too in Element Unknown, where like you're saying, like Rex is from super privileged, and Mina, like she's able to like translate all these different languages, but never really had the like reason to even use that kind of talent. And
Mhm.
so them two coming together gives her a reason, because she becomes like a government translator. But whereas, and then Rex is trying to find his place in society and try to be like his dad in like helping with government stuff, but he doesn't necessarily want to go that route. He'd rather do something more outgoing, more active, whereas dad is a lot more kind of like wants to make an impact, but more local impact, where Rex wants to just go out and go do stuff rather than try to like get other people involved and have their backing. He just wants to go do it and just get it done and over with, so to speak. So kind of like the whole personality thing of different people wanting the same goal, but maybe going about it differently, and but still not understanding the other person's viewpoint and why they might want to go that way.
Mhm. Yeah, I actually was just talking about this on another podcast like last week. When my husband and I first met, we were sort of on the surface very, very different politically. And, when it wasn't serious, that wasn't a problem. But then, when we started to have more serious conversations, it's like, how are we going to do this? And I remember over dinner one time, I'm like, I think we're actually really, really similar. And he's looking at me like, what? Like, because he's like down home Midwestern guy, and I'm very much from the East Coast, have very different outlook on things. And he's like, I don't think so. I'm like, no, we want the exact same thing, but the way you think we should get it and the path we should take is a different one from the one that I think that we should take. And he was just like silent for like several minutes. And he's like, okay, you know what? You're right. And obviously we've made things work now. But it is like at first on the surface it can be very, very complicated. And I think also with parent-child relationships, like in your book, it's very easy to butt heads when someone has
Hmm.
more experience potentially, because you can fall into that like, well, I know we should do this because this is how you know we have done it, or this is what I think would work, and that doesn't always mean that it's the most helpful.
Right. Like sometimes the tried and true way isn't so tried and true if new
Mhm.
circumstances arise or some new brand new obstacle that hasn't been, encountered before, then old ways might not work.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. So, tell our listeners where they can find your books and find you, and are you doing any events coming up?
Um, I think in April, it'll have to see just because things get busy once it
Yeah.
starts getting warm. But I'm hoping to do the National Poetry Month like I did last year.
Oh, awesome.
So last year I tried, I think I got 25 out of the 30, but I try to do a poem every day.
Hmm.
And I usually posted it on my story on Instagram,
Oh,
which is
awesome.
just my name. So it's like Brittany S. Avery. That's pretty much everywhere. You can find me there at Brittany S. Avery. But
And that's Brittany,
so
Brittany with an I. Yeah.
yes, ANI at the end. Yeah, because there's so many different ways to spell Brittany. Goodness. But yeah, so I'm probably gonna do that. I'm probably gonna participate too in Indie April,
Mhm.
which is a thing that got huge last year on Twitter. So I'm hoping it'll do that again, and just highlight my book, try to see if I can find other cool indie authors to highlight. So those are probably the two main ones that I'll be looking forward to next month.
Mhm.
It was a lot of fun last year, so I'm hoping to, especially the poetry thing, do something similar to what I did last year.
Mhm. Yeah, I do like those like daily challenge or weekly challenges. I mean, I'm I'm terribly inconsistent with them. Um, but it is kind of fun to like break your brain out of like its usual pathways of thinking. And I think sometimes the prompts can be really cool.
Oh yeah, definitely. It helped me to really flex my creative muscles just because some of the prompts are things that I don't usually write about. So I was like, huh.
Hmm.
And it got me kind of thinking throughout the day. And usually by like the later half of the day, I could jot something down and then maybe like fiddle a here and there as the day goes on. But the prompts were really helpful to kind of think outside of my little box.
Right. Yeah. Now, where can people find your book? And obviously, you have a website as well. So, what's
Mhm.
the URL for that?
URL is Brittany, A-I, S, Avery.com.
Hmm.
And you can find my book on Amazon and be on the lookout for the sequel.
Yay! And hopefully that'll be later on this year. Fingers crossed.
Hope so. Yes.
Yeah.
Like if I can get my brain to get the first draft done, at least.
That's the hardest part.
Yep.
Well, awesome, and thank you again so much for joining me. I always have fun with these amazing conversations and like the unexpected stuff about like coding and everything. So
Yeah. This was fun. Thank you for having me.
yeah, no problem. This has been the Amphibian Press podcast. I'm V.S. Holmes, and with me today was Brittany Avery. Thank you so much for listening.